Here is Caitlin yesterday evening. Stokes, what exactly triggered your anger before you retreated to the bench? Honestly, it stings. Officials shouldn't overlook that kind of play. And now I'm forced to compete, with a leg injury for the remainder of the match. It's absurd. You simply can't miss those kinds of fouls. Did they provide any justification when you approached them? They admitted they missed the contact, which is fair enough. But you cannot knee me and trip me like that. This isn't just your standard grumbling about a physical game. Caitlin Clark is asserting that she endured hard contact, kept playing through a bruised leg, and feels the referees failed to call an obvious violation. Now, watch her getting removed from the court last night. She completely loses her cool. Pow! She whacks the table as she exits. Very curious behavior. She pointedly ignores Stephanie White. That definitely doesn't signal a healthy dynamic. Then came the frustration on the bench. Clark struck the table while walking off the hardwood and bypassed Stephanie White without any acknowledgement. One tense episode doesn't confirm a fractured relationship, but it certainly gives onlookers a valid reason to wonder if her ire was directed strictly at the referees or if the substitution pattern itself had become a point of contention. Notice this specific detail. She shares a high five. Did you catch that? She offered a moment of connection, a quick handshake right there with Austin Kelly as she arrived on the sideline. Look at that. It's intriguing. My guy Ben Daniel, calling all conspiracy theorists, she completely snubbed Stephanie White, yet she greets Austin Kelly warmly. That subtle difference is the reason this footage went viral. Clark appeared to bypass White entirely, while choosing to interact with assistant coach Austin Kelly. It might just be a matter of timing, body language, or a frustrated athlete trying to process an intense moment. However, deeper into this narrative, the team's rotation logic makes dismissing that brief gesture as trivial difficult. The actual issue isn't whether a single handshake was ignored. It is whether Clark maintains faith in the strategy governing her minutes, her substitutions, and the team's offensive identity, while she occupies the floor. I also remain convinced that this squad will never function in the way we expect as long as Stephanie White remains the head coach. That is my firm belief. Absolutely. I do not think they are compatible from an offensive standpoint. It's a clash of system versus star player, and Stephanie White is attempting to force a square peg into a round hole. The player simply doesn't align with her scheme. There is the core argument from the external perspective. System versus individual talent. That constitutes a much heavier critique than blaming a coach for one poor rotation. Clark rose to legendary college status by commanding, pushing the tempo, pulling defenders out of position from deep, and forcing vulnerabilities before the opposition can set their defensive scheme. While coaches naturally seek order and defensive discipline, the vital issue is whether that rigidness bolsters a star's unique talents or slowly diminishes them until she blends into the pack. This is crucial, as Indiana isn't dealing with an ordinary high-volume guard. They are responsible for the centerpiece around whom the entire organization's outlook has shifted. When Clark is coming back from injury, patience is logical. When she is rattled by physical play, keeping composure is sound. However, when the franchise mixes medical limitations with erratic lineup changes and an offense that struggles from one trip down the court to the next, every benching carries immense weight. The audience starts to view standard coaching moves as a litmus test for whether the management actually comprehends the star player they have. Caitlin appears drained. It's alarming to see Caitlin looking so worn down, especially given she has been sidelined and subject to strict playing time caps. She clearly shows signs of both mental and physical burnout. Quote, took a knee to the quad, which really stung. The refs shouldn't ignore that. I had to push through a keen, deep bruise for the rest of the match. It's ridiculous. They can't miss those fouls. Her fatigue is a major factor, though it requires careful interpretation. Clark has missed recent games and had her minutes curtailed, so her weariness could stem from lack of conditioning, high-intensity play, injury pain, or the psychological burden of playing under a national spotlight. There is no confirmed clinical verdict beyond the bruise she mentioned, nor evidence that the team disregarded medical guidance. What is clear is that Clark perceived a tangible impact from the uncalled foul. She stated that she had to battle through the injury for the duration of the match, stressing that referees must catch such contact. This forms the initial layer of the dispute officiating and athlete health, but it doesn't encompass the full narrative. If this was simply about a missed call, the frustrations would likely have been limited to the officiating crew. Instead, the viral moments focused on the substitution, the outburst at the sideline, and her ignoring the coach. That turned the conversation from bad calls to a lack of faith. Stephanie White's rotation patterns are subpar. She never lets the players establish a consistent flow. White is blowing games again, prioritizing Mitchell's stats while actively undermining Clark. I noticed this take, and it's compelling. I've been tracking Clark's performance since 2020. Last season was tough, but this year is another story. She looks defeated, frustrated, and worn out by all that backlash. Public sentiment has now entered the narrative, necessitating an objective approach to distinguish facts from raw feeling. Assertions that Stephanie White is trying to sabotage Clark are speculative viewpoints, not concrete evidence. Allegations regarding manufactured stats or deliberate player suppression lack any substantiating data in the provided text. However, ignoring the public outcry would mean missing the root cause of the fans' collective frustration. Viewers are seeing the team's flow crumble. A guard might be medically cleared yet still require a strictly managed workload. Coaches regularly stagger these windows based on the game's flow, specific defensive pairings, or how the athlete feels. Still, the strategy needs to look logical. If Clark is pulled just as she finds her rhythm, returns once the momentum is shifted, and is then forced into a long final quarter, fans are bound to question the logic behind these constraints. Is there a total minute cap? Is it a continuous interval limit? Is it a live-adjusted medical mandate? Or is this purely a coaching whim masquerading as a medical necessity? The franchise might have perfectly sound reasoning. The problem is that ambiguity breeds its own narrative. Without a transparent explanation, every strange substitution serves as proof for whatever bias a fan might already hold. This is how tactical confusion evolves into a crisis of confidence. Indiana cannot succeed with Clark and Boston relegated to 20 to 25 minutes. What was the rationale behind Leo Boston last night? Why was she suddenly restricted after playing nearly 40 minutes? Whatever the so-called medical staff or Stephanie White are doing, it just doesn't add up. This is the most astute basketball observation here. Can Indiana consistently secure high-stakes victories when Clark and Aaliyah Boston are capped at such low playing times? Success hinges on fitness, the opposition, and execution. But the broader reality is clear. These are cornerstone athletes. Their floor time dictates the effectiveness of every other unit. Boston provides the fever, with a solid interior anchor, a reliable screen setter, and a high IQ playmaker. Clark changes how the defense reacts before the play develops. When neither is used in a predictable way, the squad falters. Stability throughout the lineup is vital. Athletes require more than just physical breaks. They need synergy and familiarity. Who takes the lead when Clark rests? Who assumes the primary screen-setting role in Boston's absence? Which wing player gets the high-priority looks? These defensive adjustments to support the second unit must be addressed with reliable clarity, especially as the season winds down. Linking health concerns to Stephanie White is purely internet speculation, not based on confirmed reporting. Yet, it highlights a breakdown in communication. Fans are left wondering if decisions stem from injury reports or tactical strategy. Such uncertainty helps no one. It invites scrutiny toward the staff, portrays the medical personnel as erratic, and leaves the players' nonverbal cues to tell a story. More compelling than any press release. Yeah, there is a lot of curiosity about what exactly is happening with Raven Johnson. You selected her in the draft, you failed to secure a big, and now, suddenly, she's completely hidden away. Almost as if we aren't permitted to put Raven Johnson on the floor when there's an audience watching. What on earth is going on? Suddenly, the dissatisfaction moves past Clark. Raven Johnson has become another emblem of a team roster that supporters simply cannot grasp. Selecting a prospect generates buzz, but it never guarantees immediate court time. Newcomers might be benched for schematic flaws, shooting, deficits, training habits, or logjams at their position. None of those factors are inherently controversial. The problem is the pattern. When the substitution patterns look chaotic, veteran roles shift abruptly, and a rookie vanishes from the rotation, spectators begin hunting for a single narrative to blame. That is, typically when the most sensational rumor takes hold, regardless of its accuracy. A competent franchise doesn't need to broadcast private medical records or internal disputes, but it does need a coherent identity. You should be able to view a few plays and recognize the team's intended offensive philosophy. Indiana's identity right now seems disjointed on screen. Sometimes they play with pace, other times they are glacial. Sometimes they run through Clark, while other times they force her into a rigid, traditional set. Adaptability is a strength. Aimlessness is a flaw. The real issue is whether these shifts create a competitive edge or simply ruin their flow. Every defeat feels like a regression, where the quality of play, coaching, and officiating looks worse than a high school level. It is genuinely awful to watch. Truly disgraceful. The whole association should be ashamed. The Valkyries are allowed to play physically and rough, but the Fever seem to be under a microscope. This grievance regarding the refs holds merit. Independent issue, since rotating the defense doesn't fix it. Clark felt she took a knee to the thigh, and the footage provided in the report isolated the impact by zooming in and highlighting it. The broadcaster wondered about neck-level interaction, although he admitted he couldn't pinpoint the exact nature of the play. This ambiguity matters. Slow-motion replays might show physical touch, yet they can make routine motions seem calculated. One shouldn't assume malice based solely on a paused frame. The criteria ought to be straightforward. Did the ref miss a foul, and was the officiating balanced? Clark spoke up openly, insisting that she felt an uncalled penalty caused her actual bodily harm. Supporters then contrasted the rough play permitted against Indiana with the strictness shown toward Golden State, without a detailed analysis of every single possession. Such claims remain anecdotal, yet they mirror a common sentiment regarding Clark. Rivals act hyper-aggressively because referees fear being accused of shielding the league's top draw. It is impossible to govern a match based on a player's fame. Conversely, they must not overcompensate by allowing blatant fouls. To look impartial. Stability is the only fair metric. When that wavers, every physical bump turns into a controversy. Each whistle is interpreted as prejudice, overshadowing the actual game of basketball. I started watching because of CC, but I'm finished since she won't defend herself. Goodbye. CC, you are complicit here. You lack self-respect by allowing others to target you with impunity. Look, I've got to be honest. There is a segment of the audience deeply frustrated that Caitlin Clark won't leverage her position. She possesses real influence. This is the point where things become tricky for the player herself. Some followers have stopped pointing fingers exclusively at the organization, the coaching staff, or the refs. They want to know why Clark refuses to assert her status more forcefully. They reason that a superstar with such massive reach, branding potential, and vital importance could force higher safety standards, systemic reform, or internal structural shifts. That sounds easy from the bleachers. It isn't. Publicly challenging a manager can destroy team morale. Scolding the referees can lead to monetary penalties and distract from the squad's focus. Pressuring medical personnel could create a dangerous narrative that the player is undermining professional, clinical judgment. Demanding a trade would be a radical step, especially given no proof exists that she asked for one. Character matters. Clark is constantly forced to defend herself against external controversies entirely beyond her control. Reports indicate she was unfairly dragged into heated debates regarding the racist harassment targeting Chelsea Gray, even though Clark held zero responsibility. Regardless of one's view on her public statements, this creates immense strain. You either speak up and invite national scrutiny, or remain reserved and face backlash for your silence. Therefore, expecting her to leverage her status imposes a burden that spectators never have to shoulder. It is far more telling that the front office seems to require a player-led outcry before addressing fundamental operational failures. Termination is deserved for wasting a generational star. Lynn Dunn, Amber Cox, and Stephanie White must go. Wow. Unbelievable. CC, demand a transfer immediately. Escape this toxic culture. Your head coach has destroyed everything. No other explanation is needed. This perspective is striking. Insistent calls to fire White, Cox, or Dunn, alongside pleas for a trade, demonstrate how wide the rift of skepticism has grown. These aren't necessarily objective calls for justice. A simple defeat, a bad officiating call, or a frustrated athlete don't constitute systemic organizational failure. Yet, such reactions highlight how fans now interpret isolated incidents as part of a larger pattern. Physical fouls go unpunished. Clark shows irritation. A benching happens abruptly. The coach seems unresponsive. The substitution patterns remain baffling. The roster just doesn't appear cohesive. Once the audience links these occurrences, every minor blunder reinforces their cynicism. This is precisely why a random win might not resolve the premise. Deep-seated frustration. Victories might muffle the noise, but they don't prove the underlying strategy is actually functional. Demanding a trade represents the peak of this anxiety, fueled by the belief that the situation is beyond saving. There is nothing in the record suggesting Clark shares that grim assessment. The immediate challenge is whether Indiana can cultivate a sustainable strategy for her without disregarding legitimate health protocols. It takes more than just padding her time on the court. It requires identifying the team's true identity when she is in the lineup. Honestly, despite her supposed minutes cap, she was out there for nearly the entire fourth quarter. This entire situation feels like a sham. I have to tell you, it is genuinely brutal. Truly brutal. Watching this is exhausting. This inherent inconsistency is exactly what fuels the ongoing debate. A strict playing time limit that somehow permits Clark to compete through nearly the entire final period. That isn't inherently illogical. Franchises often reserve the time of restricted athletes for the most critical game moments of a match. Should clinical directives cap cumulative workload instead of individual stints, a late surge can work. Yet, that logic has to stand up to tactical scrutiny and how the game unfolds. When Clark is pulled during a tight contest, brought back after momentum shifts, and kept out there for an extended final stretch, those constraints look less like a methodical recovery plan and more like a haphazard reaction to the scoreboard. Spontaneity is sometimes vital, but constant trial and error suggests the coaching staff hasn't settled on an optimal rotation. This is where medical and technical responsibilities should diverge. Trainers define physical limitations, while the coach governs the allocation of playing time. If the limit is 25 minutes, they must design a scheme that maintains flow, shields the athlete, and keeps the unit competitive during bench intervals. Limits are no excuse for chaos. They are design hurdles to be overcome. Frustration on the sidelines might not target one specific choice or person. It could represent an emotional breaking point involving pain, a missed foul call, lack of autonomy over her minutes, and watching another winnable game disappear. While that remains a theory, it aligns far better with the visual evidence than simply assuming the outburst was just about a substitution. They are picking up some essentially meaningless wins. I feel this obscures some deep-seated flaws. They simply happen to possess a star trio, capable of stealing games. But postseason play will likely expose them as a first-round exit, provided they even qualify. And, as for Caitlin Clark, bless her, I don't believe. You can just... Now we arrive at the underlying worry the previous clips hinted at. The analyst posits that sporadic successes might hide systemic failures, leaving the team extremely fragile when playoff intensity hits. That outlook is subjective, but the logic holds up to inspection. Elite. Individual talent can bail out broken plays. A strong core can produce enough offense to overcome opponents, even when the team's strategy is sloppy. Playoff series are unforgiving. Defenses ruthlessly exploit roster weaknesses, shut down primary options, force secondary players into tough spots, and demand tactical adjustments. If Indiana's scoring hinges on Clark conjuring magic once the standard play set collapses, the pressure will skyrocket per round. If the staff restricts her time without cultivating viable secondary scorers, those bench-heavy minutes become liabilities. If Boston's utilization shifts erratically, rivals can easily collapse. Make spontaneous choices without needing to follow a script. That explains exactly why this situation blew up. It wasn't just the desk slamming, the bad officiating, or the snubbed handshake. It was the clear realization that the Fever organization still hasn't balanced the act of keeping Clark safe, maximizing her potential, and fitting her into Stephanie White's specific tactical framework. Individually, those goals are logical. The trouble lies in attempting to juggle them without a visible priority list. Physical safety must remain the top concern. Once medical clearance is granted within specific boundaries, empowering her performance should dictate how her time is spent. The team structure should ideally revolve around her unique offensive impact. Instead, the footage implies the process is backwards. They lean on the system, drop Clark into it, and then scramble to adjust only when the game or her health demands it. This perspective might be incomplete. We lack access to practice drills, private health assessments, or personal dialogues between the staff and the athlete. However, public perception is built on what is visible, and viewers saw a player in pain, volatile toward refs, unhappy with benching, and seemingly detached from her coach during those tense minutes. Indiana cannot control every narrative, but they can ensure the strategy appears more coherent when cameras focus on the bench next time. You can see the mounting intensity closing in on her. Frankly, is there anyone in her corner, besides perhaps someone like Sophie Cunningham? Is anyone actually advocating for her? The underlying issue remains support. Does Clark have an internal voice that can translate her requirements into management decisions before her irritation spills over onto the court? Effective advocacy doesn't mean attacking referees, defying the coaching staff, or leaking. Regarding playing time, an offensive design that highlights her talents, and coherent, external messaging that clears up confusion. Sophie Cunningham is mentioned in the report as a potential teammate ally. Still, one person cannot fix a structural flaw. Questions are also being raised about her representation, though the source offers zero insight into what the agent is doing behind the scenes. It would be a mistake to assume there is no support, simply because things are quiet publicly. We must judge based on the results. Clark was visibly annoyed. The substitutions felt confusing to spectators, and the ref drama overshadowed the match. The coach and the star created imagery that sparked instant conjecture. These represent breakdowns in messaging, regardless of whether each specific choice had a logical, internal justification. The Pacers find themselves at a crossroads. Either view this incident as typical athletic intensity and bank on victory to smooth things over, or acknowledge it as a red flag that the roster, management, and fans have grown disconnected. The former route is simpler. The latter forces the front office to clarify the rotation strategy, refine the offensive scheme, clarify who represents athlete welfare, and prove that the partnership between coach and talent can endure public friction. So, what is your take? Was this purely Caitlin Clark lashing out due to discomfort and a bad whistle? Or did the sideline